Welcome to Green Building Matters, the podcast that matters for green building professionals. Learn insight in green buildings as we interview today's experts in LEED and WELL. We'll learn from their career paths, war stories, and all things green, because green building matters. And now our host, and yes, he has every LEED and WELL credential. Here's Charlie Cichetti.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. This is Charlie, your host, and I'm joined today by Bill Spohn, and he's up in the Pittsburgh area. And we're going to talk about, everything from the HVAC and mechanical engineering world to, just building science. We even get into residential on this podcast episode, which is going to be a treat. Bill, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Charlie, you're welcome. I really appreciate you reaching out and us connecting here.
As we like to do, we all have an origin story. We all have a story. Where are we at today? But let's take us back a little bit. Bill, tell us about, where you kind of grew up and maybe where you went to school, how you got into the mechanical field.
Sure. I grew up in a small town called Rome, New York. It's up in central New York. Small town, about 50,000 people. Grew up in an Italian-American family, Italian-American neighborhood. A lot of great values, a lot of great food. A lot of great community. So I had some aptitude in math and physics. And I went to the library one day, actually, where I worked, and I looked it up and it said, what career should you take when you are good at math and physics? And mechanical engineering came up for me. So I was sort of, inquisitive, curious about things. So I got a 4-year degree from University of Rochester in New York. And through that experience, I sort of came back to the point of my mind, actually, during college, before I graduated, I thought, I'm going to be doing something with energy in my career, or that's the way I'm going to be led. That was just a feeling that I had at that point. So I went on from there and I worked for Kodak for a few years, got a master's degree in engineering, got a PE license, and then went to work for an instrumentation company called Fisher Scientific. And I learned about kind of test and measurement, lab instruments, and things like that. And then from there, got a job with a company called Bacharach, which makes test and measurement instruments for HVAC and emissions, stack emissions. Had a great experience there, ran an engineering team there, got 3 patents issued. And then I went to work, that was 10 years, and then a company called Testo, which is sort of the European or the German analog of the Bacharach company, but they got into a much broader area of test and measurement, again, really focusing on HVAC, and then also all those building parameters, building air leakage and thermal leakage and things like that. And near the end of that time, I got involved with a guy working with me, and his dad wanted to start an internet company, and they brought me on board as an advisor. And after a couple of years, we grew it. And I came on board to buy into the company, and now I'm majority shareholder, and that's where TruTech Tools came from.
Man, that's so cool. And you and I, as we've talked, really value entrepreneurship, and you've got a lot going on. So take us back to that moment, though, that tipping point about sustainability. You said it was energy. So as I understand it, I'm based in Atlanta. Power's pretty cheap here. Say you work in Texas, power's pretty cheap. Yeah, maybe it's getting a little more expensive in, say, Pennsylvania. Now, New York State, yes, power is a little more costly towards the city, but maybe not upstate or out west. So, unpack that for a minute, Bill. Just tell us a little more about energy efficiency. Did you see some really fancy HVAC systems or really good lighting? Or
Well, I think it was more about getting into the diagnostics at Bacharach and learning about combustion efficiency and just sort of like avoiding waste. That's always sort of been part of me. I take it back to my parents being, growing up in the Depression era, and everything was very, very precious. So that was sort of imparted to me. And we do a lot of recycling at home. We pay attention to our energy use, and it's not so much the cost of energy, but it's just being efficient with a finite resource. That's just sort of baked into me.
No, you're right. The waste, there's just too much waste out there. So thanks for unpacking that. Because we all, I think, in this green building movement have had that moment. And I appreciate you sharing that. So Bill, who had an early influence on you in your career? Did you have any mentors, someone that really opened a door for you maybe?
I would say there have been several along the way. One of them in my very first job, and one of my first supervisors was a guy named Leo O'Neill. And he imparted to me once at a performance review, we were sitting there and I'm like, Leo, where does my job end? I really don't understand here. And he said, don't stop until you hit the fences. So it's like, just keep on. If you think it's right, keep on pursuing that. And I think that has taken me to this point in life where what I'm doing, what I think is right, what I truly believe in, I'll get advice, but it's also what I believe in. And I take that forward.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. Fast forward to today, you're the president and CEO of TruTech Tools. And I love how, you advertise on your website, because I have a commissioning firm and a lead consulting firm and a well building and Fitwell consulting firm. But I love that you are targeting, not just the HVAC technicians, but those out there tuning up buildings, those out there making sure that new construction building, it's going to be running the right way when we open up that new building. So is it a niche industry that TruTech's in, where you're really supplying those that are focused on energy and commissioning, or it's actually a lot bigger than some of us listening might think?
Well, I think our approach, or my approach personally, I've always been involved, like through those career time at Beckerich and Testo. I was always called upon to give a presentation, whether it was internal or external, and go to trade shows and meet with customers and learn things from them and get involved on technical committees. So I'm on a number of different technical committees presently and through my career. And through some of that, I've just sort of figured out where I want my company to be. And I want us to be at the forefront of the knowledge of what's going on, what the trends are, the leading trends are. So I actually don't look at it like a niche market. I think it's something everybody should be doing. And part of the reason I'm on this podcast and other things that I'm doing is I think the message has to be heard. One thing I'll just kind of remark, I went to a conference called Habitat X last month, and that's about the future of housing. And at that conference, we had a strategic planning session. And one of the things I walked away with was I'm going to commit to sneezing twice a week. And what I mean by that is I want to spread the germ of the idea of responsible use of energy and good home performance to one consumer and one technical professional a week. Wow. So I think maybe on this podcast, that might count for about maybe 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, we'll get the word out for you. But I like that analogy, right? We can all relate to that. But there's always one more that needs to hear it and maybe get inspired, or not even know. Oh, I didn't even know that existed. I gotta learn more, and that can change things for them. So you also have a couple podcasts, and I know you've been really active in your engineering society. So can you talk a little bit about that? Besides your main business, you are serving the industry in other ways. Do you mind talking a little bit about that?
Sure. As far as the podcast goes, I started last September with something called Building HVAC Science. And the idea was, in my mind, HVAC is sort of at the center of building science. It affects the systems and it's affected by the systems. So that's just sort of like a little play on words. And I just didn't want it to be building science because that's BS and those are my initials and it has a negative connotation. And that's been a lot of fun. And people have asked me, like, I did an interview for this Habitat X conference. They have a journal online that's in medium.com. If you look it up, the Habitat X journal. I did an interview for that describing why I got into the podcast and how I kind of got into doing that. And one of the factors there was that it's just, what do I pick for topics? I go where my mind goes. I'm old enough now, in my 6th decade, that I just figured out that I just got to share what I know and just see where it lands. And it's been beautiful, really. The second podcast is Res Talk. It's resnet.us, which is the residential energy rating systems, or the HERS rating. They get done on a lot of new homes. Like they've done 2.5 million homes since their inception in 1995. And they heard the executive director was a guest on my building science podcast, and he liked it so much that he contracted me to do his. So now we're taping episodes or recording episodes that'll be released every couple weeks. It's Res Talk, RESTALK.
And we'll put those links to the other podcasts in our show notes here. And Bill, I haven't told you yet, but because you're a guest on my podcast, you get a T-shirt. I'm going to mail it to you, and it says "Teach everything you know." So
wow.
I think you're going to like that one, man. Trust me, if you wear it at an airport, you're going to get a lot of compliments. So I've done that.
That is really awesome. That's a great idea, Charlie. I'm going to have to copy that.
Do it. Please do. So let's talk about some other achievements to date. Bill, what are some of your proudest achievements?
Well, I think a lot of it revolves around my family. Again, from my heritage growing up, we have a yours, mine, and ours situation. So we have 3 kids from our first marriage and 3 kids from our second marriage. And now we've got grandkids, and it's just wonderful seeing them grow up and become, young adults and getting into things. They've all gone different directions, teaching, management. But our youngest son actually joined our business. Bill Jr. joined our business last month. Oh, wow. So that's a very proud moment for me that he's come on board to carry on with our entrepreneurial business.
So cool. I have 3 boys. They're younger. They're 10, 7, and 5. So we'll see what the future brings. But it's great, man. Well, what's keeping you busy today, work-wise? Again, I know you're getting the word out, going to conferences. You got your podcast, but in your main business too. What's keeping you busy today?
Well, it's a combination of things. We have about 12 people. We have exactly 12 people working for us. And we're sort of busting at the seams. So we're looking at moving to a new building. So all the logistics and costs and, intricacies of doing that. We also, we're an internet company, so it's e-commerce, and we really have to be careful about fraud, because a lot of people out there are figuring out ways to get around all kinds of systems. So I'm going to a seminar tomorrow to learn more about fraud prevention, so that we don't end up getting caught shipping something and then getting a charge back from the customer. And then we lose the money, we lose the goods. It's just a mess. So we have to kind of keep on our toes with that. And then podcasting and, something else. I don't know if I mentioned this to you before, but my wife and I are planning to build a high performance home for ourselves here in the Pittsburgh area. So that's keeping us very busy. And it's actually like one of the topics I wanted to talk about is the way we're approaching it is it's not a passive house, but it's going to have a lot of passive house type features, which is like solar shading, orientation, insulation, air sealing, those kind of things, ERVs, energy exchange, ventilation. But we're going to use a modular built home or a manufactured home. And on Monday, our builder is building homes in the area, and they truck them in from a factory. And they lift them with a 60-foot crane and plop them into place and bolt them down. So that we just witnessed one going in, like we're going to do next year. We witnessed that on Monday.
Wow. I'm sure an expert like you makes a great client and a tough client, because you get to have the contractor do some of the latest and greatest, but then also really know your stuff. So.
That's absolutely right. In fact, we hired an architect for the design, and he introduced me to somebody at this party where they were setting the house in place. He goes, "Yeah, meet Bill. He's a troublemaker," but he said it with a smile. So I think that's okay.
Oh man, that's good stuff. Way to practice what you preach, for sure. All right. So real busy today, growing the business. I mean, good luck with that expansion for sure. With e-commerce, if you don't mind, since gbes.com, we're an online education company. We have customers listening here all over the world, and it makes me so happy when we have calls with clients in London or Qatar or in Asia. Just, it's good because Lead is really growing, Well's growing, the main programs we work in. But just give us a quick peek. How far do some of your tools and instrumentation ship? You have clients all over? Customers all over?
So we have, we're a reseller. So we're a distributor, primarily e-commerce, and we have about 50, actually more than 50 different brands. And a lot of those brands have set up a regional distribution, different territories in the world. So we respect that. We work within those parameters. So we focus mainly on the US and Canada. That's quite enough for us. We do get a lot of inquiries, I'd say 2 or 3 every day from New Zealand, Ireland, Australia, everywhere people want to buy from us, but we respect what our manufacturers have set up.
No, that's fair. That's good business practice. I'm just intrigued though. One last question about your online e-commerce stores. What's the hottest seller? Like, is there something right now that you just line off the shelf?
At this very moment, we introduced a new design of it's sort of a boring product, but it's a vacuum evacuation kit for use when you prep an HVAC system after you pipe it in, and you got to pull out all the moisture and everything before you introduce the refrigerant into basically virgin piping, virgin compressor. Sure. So we've introduced these vacuum hoses that actually my old partner, TruTech, Jim Bergman, he designed these for a company called AccuTools. And we received a pallet load of product in on Thursday, and we shipped about 50 by yesterday afternoon, which is pretty high volume for something that costs $600 to $1,000.
That's fantastic, man. No, I'm just curious, and you're right. That's a tool that we all don't use every day, but it's needed on our projects.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about sustainability, green buildings. I always like to ask this question. Where do you think we'll be shifting next? What's around the corner? What's the crystal ball say?
Well, how did you know I'm bald?
Your LinkedIn profile picture.
There you go. Okay. My crystal ball. So I'm rubbing my crystal ball right now. And I think it's going to be in factory-built homes, manufactured homes.
Okay.
And one of the reasons why we went for it, we took a factory tour in June of this builder. And it was just everything could be fixtured. There were the same employees working day in, all week long under a roof, and all the building materials were under a roof. And they had stores of building materials for all their jobs in this warehouse they would bring to bear on the 5 assemblies or boxes that they're building as they're moving them, literally pushing them through this factory. So I think it provides a lot of ability for quality, integrity, and I think a schedule. And there's a lot of different things which I think are very interesting about manufactured homes.
I love it. And you're right. We're not learning enough about it. We're not maybe seeing it in our areas, but it doesn't mean it's not happening, and businesses are popping up and they're doing it right. And, we talked about waste at the beginning of the podcast. And so I know for a fact that's going to limit a lot of waste that otherwise happens when we're cutting all that lumber on site. So that's really awesome, man. So Bill, so far in your career, what's your specialty? What's your gift?
I want to say it's a combination of curiosity and listening. And also taking that kind of curiosity and synthesizing, like I call it. Some people call thinking out of the box. Sometimes I say a third angle thinking. It's like usually there's like a problem or a situation, and everybody's thinking it like this plane. And then I try to take myself up above the plane and look at it from a totally different direction. And sometimes like there's a solution that lies in there that you just don't see because you're at ground level. You got to get up above the problem.
Yeah, sometimes that just takes a touch of patience or an extra 5 or 10% thoroughness to say, I've got time to actually think about this, not just react. So I love it, man. That's a great answer. You're a pretty busy guy, right? Entrepreneur on the business. You've got other obligations, but any routines or rituals, any just best practices you'd share with those listening? What's helped you be successful?
I use a lot of digital tools for some groups, like I'm in a Blue Collar Roots network, which is the podcast network that I'm in. It's actually a network. We have 4 different shows. We use Slack for that, which is a tool people aren't familiar with. They can look it up. For our business, and actually from some personal lists, I use something called Trello, which allows you to create like little, sort of like sticky notes in a virtual world under different boards. And then you can sort of, line those up. And because I can have it on my phone and on my laptop, and they all sync together, it's when the thought occurs to me, I try to trap the thought and get it into a digital form so I can process it and use it later.
And actually, both of those have great mobile apps. I second what Bill just said. We have both of my companies use Slack and Trello, very good tools. So I second that. Absolutely. Bill, we're getting to know each other more, but you may not know, I'm a fan of the bucket list. And I actually have over 100 items on my bucket list. I'm a relatively young entrepreneur, but I do have some gray hair. But, I've got a bucket list, and I try to knock out a few things a year. Hey, what's on your bucket list? What are 1 or 2 things?
Well, right now, I think the major one is I'm also an amateur genealogist, not even amateur. I just kind of hack around at it, just trying to figure out my family origins or story. And I'd like to write a book about both sides of my family, as my mother and my father's side, and sort of the struggles that came over as immigrants at the turn of the century. And then that book would be like for just, family, that kind of thing, but pictures, and really do the research and figure out what the story was, what was going on, backstory. And then tied into that would be a trip to Sicily, which is where all my grandparents are from, to meet with them, to meet with the family members who are there. And I've already made some inroads at contacting some people that are existing relatives. So I've done I'm on, Ancestry.com, Family Tree. I've done 3 different DNA tests. So that's sort of my,
man. Gosh, that's so neat. My last name's Cichetti, so Italian. It turns out my great grandmother came through Ellis Island there. And so just trying to, I'd love to compare notes sometime, but
sure.
They say everyone has a book in them. So, I'd push back and say you could make that into an online course or a book on, how one might go about tracing their genealogy and some ideas on how to celebrate it. Sounds like you've already thought through it. So, man, that's really cool.
And actually, I did join the local genealogy society, and I had to figure out the date of a certain picture. I could tell by my uncles that were in it, but I didn't know, what date it was. So I came up with this like 3D spreadsheet, knowing certain other facts, and I narrowed it down to what year the picture was taken. And I showed it to somebody there, and I said, people must do this all the time. He goes, I've never seen that before. That is awesome. So
you might be on something there. No, that's really neat, man. Thank you for sharing that. Good luck with the search and that trip back to Sicily. And I'm sure one that maybe it's not on the bucket list, but you're doing is your home. That's going to be such a neat build there. Hey, let's talk about books. I like to listen to a lot of books. Every now and again, pick up a paper or hardback copy, but usually a lot of Audible for me, and just try to get through lots of good books. Any recent books you'd recommend, or maybe even a classic?
I think it's a classic, but it's actually called, it was given to me by a friend recently. It's called A Pattern Language. Okay. And it's by Christopher Alexander and several other people. It's actually written in around 76 or 77. And it's this very thoughtful process of how people live and work in spaces. And this includes towns, villages, cities, offices, and homes. And it's a very thick book, and it has all these little sections in it where you look at these different patterns and sort of analyze. And like for product, people call it like use cases. So it's like, where would you want to have this feature in your home, or would you want to expand this feature, or how should things be organized? And it takes you through these little tiny thought processes that are helping us feed to our architect to design our home.
Man, maybe it was even a little ahead of its time, but that sounds like an awesome book. We'll definitely put that book in the show notes, and I'm going to check it out. Thank you. Actually,
I think because it's out of copyright, it's actually online. There's an online PDF version of it. So I'll send you that link.
Oh, that's even better. Thank you for doing that. One more question is, there's some listening that maybe are jumping into this green building movement. There's a lot of facets to it. We've taken a little bit of a dive into some of what you do, and maybe we can talk about it for a few more minutes. But any words of encouragement, any career advice to those that are getting into energy efficiency or commissioning, or maybe just green buildings?
I would say look at the personal aspect. See what's inside of you. If it is part of your career, then there's probably something in you that's driving that. And try to do some things on your own that are, a personal responsibility, responsible use of energy, that kind of thing, or get involved with the sneezing twice a week. If you really got it in you and you have some good stories to tell, reach out there, bring it up. We were amazed, like when we were looking at Passive House, I started a private Facebook page originally for family members. Now it's up to 400 people. It's a closed Facebook group about our high performance home and how it's moving along. And because of that, we had my sister-in-law actually texted me in the middle of one day, and she goes, "Can you please explain to me what a passive house is? I'm talking to somebody here and trying to tell them what it is." So I sneezed on her, and she spread the germs. So let's keep it up.
You've got to keep it up. Bill, it's really been a lot of fun to have you on the podcast today. We're going to put the links to everything that we talked about. And if you want to find out more about Bill and his company and his podcast, make sure you go check it out. Bill, thanks so much for being on the Green Building Matters podcast.
It's been awesome, Charlie. Thank you so much for inviting me here.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. At gbes.com, our mission is to advance the green building movement through best-in-class education and encouragement. Remember, you can go to gbes.com/podcast for any notes and links that we mentioned in today's episode, and you can actually see the other episodes that have already been recorded with our amazing guests. Please tell your friends about this podcast. Tell your colleagues. And if you really enjoyed it, leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on next week's episode.